Good afternoon. And now for something nearly completely different. So I'm Steve Goldner. I've met some of you, many of you I haven't. So you have a sense of what my prejudice is as I go through this presentation. Let me tell you briefly my background. So I'm the forensic toxicologist who did 18,000 autopsies at the New York Medical Examiner's Office. And the next year I formulated a drug called methadone because I thought it would be a really good idea to give heroin addicts a way to get off of heroin. And then I turned 23. So I started that drug company and ran it with the best of intentions. And then over a course of time, did some other science. I became an FDA attorney, working always in the pharmaceutical industry. So now I find myself here, perhaps either as the scapegoat of the pharmaceutical industry or as the conscience of it. We'll see how many darts you get to throw at me. The topic of my talk is, what is FDA going to do about cannabis? So let me tell you, cannabis is actually an FDA regulator's dream product. Everything cannabis is going to be done under tighter and tighter state regulations, state after state. There's a seed-to-sale tracking system that allows inspectors to tap into the data right from their computers. They never have to go out to the factories anymore. It's great for them. Not only that, this state-by-state balkanization process will keep large companies out of the industry, and FDA really likes to have the power to shut down people who disagree with it, and large companies are very aggravating in that way. So FDA is going to love jumping into cannabis. Frankly, the really important question is, are you going to love it? So I'm going to give you 5 reasons why you might actually like the idea that there'll be FDA oversight of cannabis one fine day. First, you're going to like marketing your products and selling them across state lines throughout the United States, and you're really going to like being able to export it to countries everywhere else. 2, you're going to like having uniform standards, state by state by state. It really does make life easier. 3, you're going to like the idea that FDA regulations don't change from year to year. Yes, they seem to get stuck in concrete, but they change slowly, and that has value. 4, you're going to like that medical professionals will recommend to their patients that they use your products. Now, best of all, you're going to like that this will give you access to the banking system and to equitable IRS rulings. That's the carrot that Congress will give while it gives you the stick that's called FDA. All of these desirable outcomes come with FDA oversight. It legitimizes industries. And yes, there are trade-offs. Well, there are trade-offs throughout life. Let me stop, though, for a second. And I want you to remember that there are some people who are not here in this room. There are some people, frankly, who don't wish this industry well. For all of those marijuana deniers or very sincere people who are truly worried that children will be born stoned, that children will overdose on cookies, that driving throughout the United States will become much more difficult when some of you are doing 25 miles an hour on the interstate. I want you to remember that the way to have all of that solved is by having effective manufacturing and packaging, and that really is enforced effectively by the Food and Drug Administration. I know that every state has state regulations, and I used to be a member of the state Association of Food and Drug Officials. They really have very little power, and they know it. So they don't have any ability to really set standards, and they don't really have any ability to enforce them. I know this industry is very troubled by that, but from the other side of the story, it's not that hard. So until FDA gets involved in the industry, the best group that's actually working towards creating standards that will elevate this industry is a group called FOCUS. Leslie Eigenking is leading that charge. She has been around through this conference all along, and if any of you have the chance to meet her and talk with her, you really ought to. It really is setting where the future of this is going. In the remaining time I have, I want to touch on just two themes. One, how will FDA shoehorn cannabis into its regulatory scheme? And two, when is this going to happen, and what should you be doing to get ready for it? So on the first topic, how will FDA fit cannabis into its regulatory system? Leaving aside all the legal mumbo-jumbo, the bottom line question is it a drug? Is it a food? Is it a medical device? Is it a non-FDA service or product? If it is, that way you get the best of both worlds. You get FDA protection, and you don't really have to live to the regulations very much. Historically, FDA has taken on many new industries. It's always found a way to create regulations that seemed painful at first, but they turned out to actually be very manageable. Okay, it needed a bunch of lawyers and consultants to manage it, but sorry, that's how this industry's going. What's more, though, it made American products among the safest and most effective in the world, and that is good for business right here. Frankly, it is good for you. Plus, FDA polices the market to keep out inappropriate competition from overseas. And frankly, that's good for the people right here. When it comes to creating new federal regulations that affect America's health and wellness, interestingly, FDA always steps up reluctantly. The truth of it is, these are people who are really busy doing something else. They honestly don't need this aggravation. They have enough aggravation, like most people do in their lives already. So those examples of it are Congress asked FDA to regulate medical devices 40 years ago. FDA stalled doing it for years. Congress asked FDA to regulate tobacco. They stalled doing that. Home pregnancy test kits, home genetic lab testing. Many people don't realize it, but FDA didn't really have the power to regulate drugs 75 years ago. And they had to be dragged into that, and it was only because there was a consumer product safety problem, and a couple dozen people died. Now, we don't expect people to die from marijuana. It's simply because it is so tremendously non-toxic. But there are people who spray cannabis with toxic compounds. There are. And it's often difficult to detect. And this is a health safety problem. The first time that comes out and a bunch of people die, it will cast an incredible shadow over this industry. On the flip side of it, what's interesting is FDA is actually struggling right now to figure out how to regulate cannabis. It has a unique problem because the underlying compounds are so remarkably safe. An example of this is that the usual dose of cannabis delivers about 10 milligrams smoked. So this gives a safety ratio. The safety ratio is the lethal dose to a recreational or therapeutic dose. That ratio for cannabis is about 10,000-fold in non-tolerant users. In comparison, the safety ratio for alcohol is about 10-fold. So cannabis is therefore about 1,000 times safer on acute administration than beer or wine. And that is making a tremendous problem in FDA, as to figure out how to fit this in with their decades-long scheme. I know many of you don't really worry too much about what FDA worries about, but it will come out to our benefit. Put another way, when drug companies test in animals before putting a drug into a clinical trial, generally you need to see an effective dose that's 1/100th of what the lethal dose is. Otherwise, FDA generally doesn't let the clinical trial go forward. Cannabis has an effective dose that is 1/10,000th. That's the type of safety levels that you generally find with fruits and vegetables. So FDA is actually struggling with this food safety level, but for a product that delivers measurable drug effects. It works in our favor. So now, down to one of the bottom lines from my first issue. How will FDA actually regulate cannabis and its products? How will it keep people safe while it still allows the industry to grow and thrive? I suspect that cannabis buds and leaves for smoking will have their own regulatory scheme, just like the one recently created for tobacco. That's in 21 Code of Federal Regulations, Section 1140. Heirloom or backyard cannabis growing will be allowed as a compromise in Congress, just like making beer or wine at home. It's for personal use or gifts, but not selling it. Industrial growers will register, just like state systems allow, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture will be given a mandate to come help improve the crops. Purified extracts of cannabis, those with real medical claims, are already regulated as drugs under 21 CFR 201. Dr. Guy Chamberlain is speaking later, and he may be able to talk about this. I've also formulated some unique THC and CBD formulations, and I know there are others here, but that's for another day. Those special formulations will be able to be sold at retail in pharmacies, supermarkets, and food stores via the well-established FDA system that's called RX to OTC switch, or prescription to OTC switch. All you need to do is run an extra large clinical trial, and FDA is working very hard to allow drug companies to use social media to make it easier. I expect that cannabis edibles will have a revised medical food category. That's in 21 CFR 101. That's where foods are allowed to make nutritional claims that also have health claims. Cannabis oil will be regulated as an over-the-counter drug, just like cough syrups. This will be under a new cannabis monograph. The United States Pharmacopoeia, the USP, is right now writing a USP monograph for cannabis oil. So those who are involved in that field will want to talk to the USP to make sure your products conform to that USP monograph. Otherwise, sorry. There are medical devices that deliver cannabis, vaping devices, and many more. Some of them have software for data collection, or they recommend suitable strains to the customer. FDA has no problem with this conceptually. Lots of this is done for many, many other drugs. FDA will create a fast-track process, as it already has done for other products, for reviewing these devices. And I promise you, it will actually improve the quality, reliability, and you'll see a much greater diversity as technology moves into our field. In addition, FDA already has a system to figure out whether a product is a food, a drug, a medical device, or a combination of all of them, and it's called, cleverly, the Combination Product Review Process. FDA spends about 60 days reviewing any petition to be able to allow someone to figure out where it fits in there. So that's a top-line summary of how this entire industry will fit neatly under FDA review. So now, briefly, what's the process for that? So there's going to be a process that allows for public input. Everyone can come to Washington, D.C. and take their turn at a microphone for a limited length of time, and they'll be thanked for their input. The process is called notice and comment. It's actually managed by FDA and industry lawyers and consultants, and that rulemaking generally extends over 6 years. I've been involved in those many times over the last 40 years. Dissatisfied parties often file lawsuits during and after the process. Sometimes they win, but they almost always lose. What you can get out of it, though, is you can expect 4 outcomes. 1, there will be a dramatic realignment in this industry. 2, there will be consolidation of the marketplace. 3, you will get improved products that meet uniform, enforced standards. So many of the questions are still about dosing levels and route of administration. Those issues will begin to be resolved. And 4, the cost of entry into the marketplace will go up dramatically. That's to the benefit of the early market entrants. Think of it as if FDA helps build a corral around your products. You want to get into the corral as quickly as possible because the walls keep getting higher. Thank you. So the process has started. Here's how it can play out. FDA is going to take some preemptive actions next year. It's going to put a shot across the bow of this industry. Continued interstate sale of mislabeled CBD products that claim to cure disease. Some of them will have THC by mistake or design. Doesn't matter. Those products with THC will be turned over to Maine Justice and DEA for prosecution. There'll be some behind-the-scenes marking of territory by FDA, and it'll start teaching state regulatory labs how to really test for cannabis. That will result in the closing down of fraudulent or incompetent testing labs, growers with pesticide residues, and edible producers who can't make consistent and properly labeled product. Some of that's going to start next year. These events will make for very newsworthy items. It's going to cast a shadow over the industry. It's going to put a chill on investment, but only certain aspects. And I hope everyone sees it for what it is. It's a natural evolution of an industry. It culls out certain individuals and companies. Collectively, it's for the good. Individually, it's very painful. Finally, what should you be thinking about now? 1, who can you partner with who shares a vision for long-term survival in this environment? 2, how can you insulate your current business from being the first set of regulatory targets? And 3, since you can't buy insurance for any of these risks, how can you begin to include good regulatory practices into your business plan? In closing, I hope I've given you some better insight into what, when, and where FDA. We've got some great opportunities in the industry. This is a magic money moment. The second great wave of cannabis is rolling across this country, and you are positioning yourself for success. I'm happy to take any questions afterwards. Apparently, I've talked for a little too long. Thank you.